The morning my brother had the locks changed on the bakery our mother left to both of us, he handed me a paper bag with my apron folded inside and told me it was cleaner this way. He didn't know I'd spent the last 4 years photographing every invoice he signed. He didn't know the second set of books existed. And he had no idea that the woman he just locked out of her own kitchen owned the building he was standing in. My name is Delia Okafor. I am 41 years old. Welcome back to Quiet Ledger, the channel where people who were taught to swallow things finally lay the receipts on the table, one page at a time. If you've ever been the responsible one, the one who never made a scene, the one everybody trusted precisely because you'd never use what you knew, then pull up a chair. This one is for you. Let me take you back to a Tuesday in October. 7:40 in the morning with the oven still cold. I ran the front of house and the books at Marigold Lane, a bakery on the corner of Plum and Ashford in a town called Bell Creek, 2 hours north of the city where I actually live now. My mother opened it the year I was born. She named it after the marigolds she planted in the window boxes every spring, the ones that smelled like pepper and held their color until the first hard frost. When she died 6 years ago, she left the bakery to her two children in equal halves, 50-50. My brother, Marcus, got the ovens and the morning shift. I got the ledgers and the nights. That was the arrangement we settled into without ever signing a word. And for the first 2 years, it worked the way grief sometimes glues people together before it pulls them apart. That Tuesday, I drove the 2 hours up from the city the way I did 3 mornings a week. And when I turned onto Plum, my key didn't fit the front door. I stood there in the cold with my travel mug in one hand and my key in the other, working it back and forth in a lock that had been a brassage on Friday and was a satin nickel quickset now. The brass one had a scratch shaped like a comma right below the keyhole. I looked at that scratch every morning for 6 years. This lock was smooth and new and wrong. That detail matters later, so hold on to it. Marcus opened the door from the inside before I could knock. He was 44 in his flour-dusted work shirt, and he had the calm, sorry for you expression he wears when he has already decided something and wants it to look like concern. He held out a brown paper bag, the kind we used for day-old rolls. Inside was my apron, the one with my name stitched in green thread folded into a neat square. I think it is cleaner this way, Dee, he said, for both of us. You are never really here anyway. Behind him, I could see the ovens were already on. The marigolds in the window boxes were dead, pulled out the soil bare. He'd had time to do that too. I didn't argue. I want you to notice that because it is the whole spine of the story. I didn't argue. I took the bag. I said, "Okay, Marcus." And I walked back to my car and I sat in the driver's seat with the apron in my lap and I did not cry. I was too busy doing arithmetic because what Marcus didn't understand, standing there feeling generous about a paper bag, was that the locks he just changed were on a building whose mortgage I had quietly refinanced into my own name 3 years earlier. On a morning he never asked about because he never asked what I do, only what I can do for him. Let me back up because that refinance didn't come out of nowhere, and neither did the second set of books. When our mother died, the bakery carried debt. Not enormous, but real. $41,000 left on a commercial mortgage with Bell Creek Savings and Loan, and a habit which I inherited along with the ledgers of robbing 1 month to pay the last. Marcus baked. Marcus was good at baking and good at being liked, and the regulars loved him, and he believed, the way charming people often do, that being loved is the same thing as carrying weight. So I carried the weight. I set up the auto pay. I caught the back taxes. And one winter, when the walk-in cooler died on a Saturday and the repair quote came to $4,200, we did not have. I put it on a card in my name and told Marcus the warranty covered it because it was easier than the fight. That is my flaw, if you want to name it. I'd rather carry a thing in silence than argue about whose thing it is to carry. I told myself it was love. Some of it was But love that never says the hard sentence out loud isn't love. It is just bookkeeping with the feelings left off the page. Here is the first incident I want you to hold, the oldest rung on the ladder. 3 years before the locks, in the spring, I sat at the little desk in the back office, the one wedged between the flower bins, and I looked at our numbers and saw that we were going to lose the building. The mortgage was current, barely, but the interest was eating us. And one more debt cooler would finish us. So I did something I never told my brother. I drove to Bell Creek Savings on a Thursday afternoon. I sat across from a loan officer named Patricia Ojo, and I refinanced the remaining $32,400 into a new mortgage in my name alone, secured by my personal credit and a down payment of $11,000 I'd saved from the bookkeeping work I did for other small shops in the city. I lowered our monthly payment from $1,140 to $890. I did it to save the bakery. I did not do it to owe my brother. But the deed and the note now read Delia Okafor, sole borrower, sole owner of the real property at the corner of Plum. And Ashford, the business was still ours, 50-50, but the floor it stood on was mine. I'll come back to why that distinction is the entire ending. I told no one, not Marcus, not my mother's sister, no one. I filed the paperwork in the folder, and the folder went into a fireproof box in the trunk of my car. And I drove home to the city and I made dinner and I said nothing. If you've ever fixed something quietly and let everyone keep believing it fixed itself, you already know the particular loneliness of that. You did the hard thing. And the reward for doing it well is that nobody ever knows it needed doing. The second rung came 18 months before the locks. By then, Marcus had married a woman named Sloane, and Sloane had ideas. Good ideas, some of them. She wanted to add a wholesale line supplying bread to two Gayfees and a hotel restaurant in the next county. It would mean a second oven, a delivery van, and an expansion of the production schedule. I ran the numbers for 3 weeks. The wholesale margins were thin but real. And if we held our costs, the line would clear about $2,000 a month in profit by the end of the first year. I said yes. I co-signed the lease on the used delivery van, a white Ford Transit, payment of $410 a month because Marcus and Sloane's combined credit couldn't carry it alone. And a default would have wrecked the credit I was using to hold the mortgage. I set conditions that time. I'd learned that much. I said it in the office out loud with Sloane present. The van refinances into your names within 12 months. I am not carrying this past a year. Marcus nodded. Sloane nodded. 12 months came and went, and the van stayed in my name. And when I raised it, Sloane said the wholesale account was still stabilizing. And Marcus said, D, you always make these things into a whole thing. And I let it go. Again, that word stabilizing is going to come back. Market. The third rung is the one that taught me to start photographing invoices, and it is the reason the second set of books exists. So stay with me because this is where the quiet woman learned to keep her own count. About a year before the locks, I noticed that our flower costs had jumped. Not gradually, the way costs creep, but in a step, a clean ledge upward in a single month. We bought from a regional supplier called Hearthstone Mill, and our flour bill had run reliably around $2,600 a month for years. Suddenly, it was $3,400. I asked Marcus. He said Hearthstone had raised prices. I said that was a 30% jump in 1 month and asked to see the invoices. He said Sloane handled the supplier paperwork now, and she pulled them. She pulled 3. They were clean. The prices matched. I almost let it go, the way I always did, but something in the way Sloane handed me exactly 3 invoices and not the 4th, the way she said that is all of them a half second too fast, set the comma-shaped scratch itching in the back of my mind. So I did something small and patient. The next time a Hearthstone delivery came on a Tuesday morning when I happened to be there, I photographed the delivery slip in the driver's hand before it ever reached the office. 40 pounds of bread flour, $55. Then I waited for that slip to appear in the books. It appeared as $95, a $40 gap on one slip on one Tuesday. I didn't say a word. I just started coming on delivery mornings. I wasn't scheduled for standing near the back door with my phone, photographing the slip in the driver's hand. Over the next 4 months, I caught it 11 times. 11 slips photographed at the door, then altered in the ledger before the month closed. The gaps ran between $40 and $120 each. The padded difference, I would later total, came to $940 across those 4 months, and the pattern extended backward over the year the flower bill had been inflated, accounted for almost exactly the $800 monthly jump. I'd spotted somebody was skimming slip by slip and laundering it through the flour. And whoever it was had counted on the fact that I never made a scene, that I would notice and sigh and carry it. They had read me correctly for 40 years. That was their mistake because the woman they'd read no longer lived in that body. I started keeping a second set of books that spring a clean private ledger of what the invoices actually said, photographed at the door before anyone touched them. Receipts in their first honest form. I kept it in the same fireproof box as the deed. I need to introduce the one person who saw me clearly in all of this, because every quiet woman who finally stands up had someone who told her she was allowed to. Mine was a woman named June Castellano, 66 years old, who ran the dry cleaner 2 doors down from the bakery for 30 years before she sold it and half retired. June had known my mother. June used to bring me coffee on the nights I did the books alone, letting herself in the back with a key my mother had given her decades ago, sitting across the desk from me, not saying much. One night, the winter after the flower thing started, I finally told her, not all of it. Just that I thought something was wrong with the numbers and I didn't know what to do. Because making an accusation would blow the family apart, and I'd spent my whole life keeping the family together. June listened the whole way through without once telling me what to do. That was her gift. She never fixed. When I finished, she folded her hands around her coffee cup, and she looked at me for a long moment, and she said the sentence I will hear in my head for the rest of my life. She said, "Honey, you keep mistaking yourself for the glue. You are not the glue. You are the load-bearing wall. And the wall is allowed to decide what it holds up." Then she finished her coffee and she let herself out the back the way she always did. And I sat there a long time in the dark with the ovens cooling, hearing it. The load-bearing wall is allowed to decide what it holds up. I spent 6 years being the glue, smearing myself thin into every crack. June gave me permission to be a wall instead. And a wall, when it walks away, takes the roof with it. That brings us back to the Tuesday in October, 7:40 in the morning, with a new lock and a brown paper bag and my name in green thread folded into a square. Stay with me because this is where the quiet starts, getting loud enough to cost somebody something. I drove the 2 hours back to the city with the apron on the passenger seat. I did not cry on the drive. I want to be honest about the one time I did, because I promised you the truth, and the truth is I am not made of stone. It was that night alone in my apartment when I opened the fireproof box to file the apron incident in my mind. My hand touched the deed, and under the deed was a photograph, the only one I keep there, of my mother in the bakery window the spring before she died, kneeling in the dirt with her hands full of marigold seedlings, squinting up at the camera, laughing at me for taking her picture while she was a mess. I sat on my kitchen floor with that photograph, and I cried once hard for about 4 minutes, alone, where no one could turn it into a weapon or a victory. Then I washed my face and I made tea and I opened the box of receipts, and I did not cry again. Not once through everything that came after. If you've ever saved your crying for the one room where it can't be used against you, you know exactly the discipline. The next morning I called Patricia Ojo at Bell Creek Savings, the loan officer who'd handled my refinance 3 years before, and I confirmed in writing what I already knew. The mortgage was current. The property was mine, free of any claim, by my brother. Then I called a lawyer, not to sue, not yet, but to understand the shape of the floor I was standing on. Her name was Renata Vance, and she practiced small business and property law out of a two-room office. And she went through it with me like an electrician tracing wires. The business, Marigold Laying, was a partnership 50-50. That part was true, and Marcus was within his rights to run the daily operation. But the building was a separate asset, real property, and it was solely mine. The bakery operated in my building under an arrangement, so informal it had never been put on paper. No lease, no rent, nothing, because when your mother dies, you don't draw up a lease with your brother. For 3 years, the business had occupied my building rent free, and I had never asked for $1 because I never thought of it as mine to charge. I thought of it as ours. Renata looked at me over her glasses and asked the question that turned the key. Has a partnership ever paid rent to the property owner? No, I said. Then there is no tenancy he can claim and no lease he can stand on. He is not your partner in that building. He is an occupant. You've never billed, and an owner who is never billed can start billing and can also decline to renew an arrangement that was never written down. She set her pen down. Delia, he changed the locks on a building he doesn't own. He thinks he locked you out of the bakery. What he actually did was occupy your property and exclude its owner. That is backwards. Legally, he is the one who doesn't belong there. I sat with that for a moment. The wall, it turned out, had been holding up a roof that was standing on the wall's own land. But I didn't reach for the law first. Stay with me. This is the part people get wrong. The law was the floor, not the weapon. The weapon, if you want to call it that, and I don't, was simpler and quieter. It was the truth laid out in order in a room where it couldn't be argued away, with the words stabilizing. I spent the next 3 weeks doing what I do best. I built the file. I took my second set of books, the photographs of the delivery slips in the driver's hands, time-stamped at the back door, and I set each one beside the altered ledger entry it became. 11 slips. I printed them two to a page, the honest slip on the left, the cooked entry on the right, with the gap circle in the same green I'd once used to stitch my name. I pulled the hostile mill statements directly from the supplier, bypassing Sloan entirely, by calling the mill and requesting a full account history as a 50% partner in the business, which I had every right to do. The mill's own records matched my photographs and contradicted our books. The patted flour cost over 14 months came to $11,200. $800 a month, 14 months, $11,200. The arithmetic was clean. Somebody had pulled $11,200 out of a business I half owned through a flour bill and dressed it as a price increase from a mill that had never raised its prices. I did not yet know for certain whose hand held the pen. I suspected, but I learned from the loan officer's runaround years ago not to accuse until the paper accuses for you. So I added one more page to the file, and this is the page that turned suspicion into fact, so don't look away. Renata advised me that as a 50% partner, I was entitled to the business's bank records. And I requested them directly from the bank, again bypassing the office. The Marigold Lane operating account showed something a cooked ledger had hidden. 11 payments, matching the 11 inflated months almost to the dollar, transferred out of the business account into a personal account. The account was not Marcus's, it was Sloane's. My brother, I came to understand, hadn't built this. He'd married it, and then he'd looked away from it the way he looked away from everything, because looking would have meant a fight, and Marcus would rather lose a slow $11,000 than have one loud conversation. The locks, the apron, the dead marigolds, all of it was Marcus clearing the one person from the building who kept her own count. He didn't lock me out to steal. He locked me out so the stealing could keep stabilizing in peace. I felt something cold and level settle behind my ribs when I understood that. Not rage. Rage is loud and it tips your hand. What I felt was the quiet you feel when a long calculation finally closes and the columns match. I'd been right about the scratch on the lock. I'd been right about the half-second pause. I'd been right for 4 years, photographing slips at the back door while my own brother thought I was just a woman who did the nights and never made a scene. Now, I could have walked into that bakery and screamed. I want to be honest that part of me wanted to, but screaming was Sloane's language. And Marcus's whole life was organized around avoiding the room where someone screams. If I screamed, I'd become the story. Crazy D, making a whole thing of it again. So I did the opposite. I scheduled a meeting. I had Renata send a single calm letter on her letterhead to Marcus and to Sloane, requesting their presence at the bakery on a Saturday morning, 8 a.m., before opening, to discuss. The letter said the property and the partnership accounts. No accusations. No dollar figures. Just a time and a place and the two words that would keep them up at night. If they had anything to hide, partnership accounts. If you've ever sent a quiet, polite sentence that you knew would land like a stone in still water, drop a comment and tell me where you were when you finally sent it. I sent mine from June's kitchen table with June across from me, not saying a word, just nodding once. When I hit the button, the same nod she gave when she used to let herself out the back. Saturday came. 8 in the morning. The oven's cold because I'd asked Renata to specify before opening, which meant Marcus had to leave them off, which meant for the first Saturday in his adult life, my brother sat in that bakery with nothing baking. I think that unsettled him more than the letter. I got there at 7:40, the same time he'd handed me the bag 3 weeks before, and my key didn't fit, of course, so I knocked on my own building, and Sloane opened the door with the sorry for you expression she'd learned from my brother. D, she said, we really don't think a lawyer was necessary. This is family. I didn't answer that. I walked past her into the kitchen that used to be my mother's. And I set the fireproof box on the steel work table. And I waited for Renata, who came in 2 minutes later in a plain gray coat and sat down without smiling. I'd written out what I was going to say the night before on index cards because I knew that if I tried to speak from feeling, I'd either soften it into nothing or sharpen it into the scene they expected. So I read from cards, numbered statements, no adjectives. Here is roughly how it went. And notice that I never once raised my voice because the whole point was that I didn't have to. Statement 1. I said, the building we are sitting in is mine. I refinanced the mortgage into my sole name 3 years ago. In the spring, when the business was $41,000 in debt and $4,000 short on a cooler we couldn't replace. The deed and the note are in this box. You are welcome to read them. I slid the deed across the steel table. Marcus didn't touch it. Sloane picked it up, and I watched the color move out of her face as she read the words. Sole borrower. Statement 2. I said, the bakery has operated in my building for 3 years without a lease and without paying $1 of rent. At market rate for this corner, that arrangement was worth about $1,400 a month. Over 3 years, I have provided this business 36 months of free occupancy, $50,400 in rent. I never charged because I believed we were family. 36 months, $1,400, $50,400. I let the number sit on the steel between us. Marcus finally looked at the deed, statement 3, and this is the one I'd practiced most because it was the one that had to be exact. I said, beginning 14 months ago, our flour costs increased by approximately $800 a month. I was told Hearthstone Mill had raised its prices. I have here the mill's own account history, which shows no price increase. I have here photographs of 11 delivery slips taken at the back door before they reached the office, each showing the true price. I have here the corresponding ledger entries, each showing an inflated price. And I have here the business bank records showing 11 transfers matching those inflated months out of the operating account and into a personal account. I laid the pages out one at a time. Slow, the honest slip on the left, the cooked entry on the right, the gap circled in green. 1. 2, 3, or 11. The only sound in the room was the paper. No one said the word stabilizing. Then I laid down the 12th page, the bank record, and I did not say whose account the money went to. I didn't have to. I just set it down and let Sloane read her own name across the top in the silence. And I watched Marcus read it over her shoulder, and I watched my brother's face do the thing I had waited 4 years and would have given anything not to see. He believed me. That was the worst part. He wasn't shocked that the money was gone. He was shocked that I'd counted it. He had known on some level he kept in the room he never entered, and he had chosen the ovens and the quiet and the slow theft over the one loud conversation. The total, I said, reading the last card, was $11,200, $800 a month, 14 months. The arithmetic is in the file. Statement 4 was the last one, and it was the only one that wasn't a number. I said, I am not here to scream. I am not going to call you names. I am going to tell you what happens now, and then I am going to leave through the back door, the way June always did. I gave them 3 facts, not threats, facts. 1, the free occupancy was over. As owner of the building, I was terminating the unwritten arrangement effective in 60 days, and they could lease the building from me at market rate with a written agreement, or they could find another kitchen. 2, the $11,200 taken from the partnership would be repaid to the partnership, which meant half of it was owed to me, $5,600. And Renata had prepared a demand letter and a draft fraud complaint, and which one got filed was up to them. 3, I was dissolving the partnership. I would sell Marcus my 50% of the business, the recipes and the name and the goodwill, at fair value, and he could keep baking under my mother's name in my building under a lease or not. But I would no longer be his partner, because a partner is someone who keeps their own count and trusts you to keep yours. And we had not been that for a long time. Marcus spoke once. He said, Dee, you've always landed on your feet. You don't need this place the way I do. There it was, the family sentence, the one they'd used my whole life to explain why I was the one who never got caught when I fell. Because no one was ever standing there to catch me. I looked at him and I didn't argue because I was done arguing. I just said I did land on my feet. Marcus, I landed on the floor I bought when you weren't looking. You've been standing on it for 3 years. Then I put the pages back in the box, slid the box off the steel table, and I walked out the back door into the alley where the dumpster was. And June was standing there in her gray coat because I'd asked her to wait. And she didn't say anything. She just nodded once and handed me a coffee. And we walked to the corner together, while behind us, in my building, my brother sat in front of cold ovens with a deed in his hand and his wife's name on a bank record. And the whole quiet machine he let run finally stopped. Here is where I refuse to give you the ending you might be bracing for. There was no reconciliation scene. Marcus did not weep and embrace me. Sloane did not confess and reform. Real life doesn't close that clean, and I'd be lying to you if I tied a ribbon on it. What happened was smaller and truer. Renata's demand letter went out. Within 3 weeks, rather than face a fraud complaint that named Sloane and a forensic accountant who'd already done the counting, they repaid the partnership the $11,200, which meant $5,600 came to me. Marcus signed the lease, $1,400 a month, in writing witnessed, and he kept baking under our mother's name. And I became, on paper, and in fact, his landlord. We are not close. Now, we are correct. He pays his rent on the 1st. I cash the check in the city twice a year on our mother's birthday, and at the holidays, he sends a short, careful message, and I send a short, careful one back. And that distance, cold as it sounds, is more honest than the warmth we used to perform. Sloane, I have not spoken to since the Saturday. The wholesale line, I am told, is doing well, stabilizing. Even I let myself smile at that one, alone once. What I got was not my brother back. What I got was my time back. I no longer drive 2 hours, 3 mornings a week to do the books for a man who locks the doors behind me. I do the books for 9 small shops in the city now, on my own terms from a desk by a window, and I make more doing that than I ever made carrying the bakery. I sold my 50% of the business to Marcus for a fair number, and I kept the building. And the building is the thing this whole story turns on. So let me bring you all the way back around to where we started, because I planted some things at the beginning and I owe you their full weight now. Remember the lock with the comma shaped scratch? For 6 years, I read that scratch every morning as a sign that I belong there, that the door knew my hand. When Marcus changed it to a smooth new lock, I thought just for a second on that cold sidewalk that he'd erased me, that the building had forgotten me. I had it exactly backwards. The scratch was never the building remembering me. The deed in the fireproof box was he changed the lock he could reach. He couldn't change the name on the note because he never knew there was a name to change. The new lock didn't lock me out of my building. It just told me finally that I needed to stop confusing a key with ownership. A key is what they give you when they want you to keep showing up. The deed is what you hold when you've decided to stop asking permission. Remember the apron, my name in green thread folded into a square in a day-old bag. He handed it back to me like he was returning something of mine, like the name was the most of me that the place could hold. I still have it, but I don't keep it folded in the bag anymore. It is hung on a hook by my desk in the city. And I look at it the way you look at a uniform from a job. You survived, not the way you look at a wound. The green thread of my name turned out to be the same green I used to circle the gaps in 11 delivery slips. The thread that marked me as the help became the ink that marked the theft. The hand that stitched my name into someone else's kitchen was the same hand that counted my way out of it. And remember the marigolds, the ones my mother knelt in the dirt to plant every spring, the ones Marcus pulled out and left as bare soil the morning. He changed the locks, like he was clearing the last of her too. I thought when I saw that empty window box that he'd had the final word on what grows there. He hadn't, because the building is mine, and last spring, after the lease was signed and the dust settled, I drove up on a Thursday when the bakery was closed. And I let myself in the back with my own key to my own building, and I planted marigolds in the window boxes myself. In the same dirt, the ones that smell like pepper and hold their color until the first hard frost. Marcus bakes under them every morning. Now, he thinks they're just flowers. I know they're a property line. My mother planted marigolds to mark what was hers. So do I. People ask me if I feel guilty taking the building, dissolving the partnership, choosing the file over the family. I used to brace for that question. Now I just tell them what June told me in the dark over cold coffee. The sentence I'll hear for the rest of my life: you are not the glue. You are the load bearing wall. And a wall is allowed to decide what it holds up. I held up that family for 6 years. And the thanks I got was a paper bag and a changed lock. So I decided to stop holding up the roof and start owning the ground. Instead, it turns out I was never the one who'd land on my feet because I was lucky. I landed on my feet because 3 years before anyone thought to push me, I'd quietly bought the floor. If you've ever been handed your own things in a bag and told it was cleaner this way, hear me, keep your own count. Photograph the slip at the door, file the deed, and tell no one until telling is a kindness to yourself instead of a debt to them. Your patience is not weakness, it is evidence, and evidence is just love that learned to keep receipts. That is the whole ledger. Setting a boundary was never me slamming a door on the people I love. It was me finally deciding who holds the key and remembering at long last that I am the one who owns the lock. Plant your marigolds. Mark, what is yours? And if this gave you the permission somebody once gave me, leave it in the comments for the next quiet person who needs to read it. And I'll see you in the next one.